Avatar movie review. So this is one of my scripted movie review series in which I go back and read an old review that I wrote years ago on the weblog and try and make a YouTube video out of it for whatever that may or may not be worth. And here we are with Avatar, which came out about 10 years ago now and which I reviewed on the weblog about 10 years ago. So, you may remember that when this movie came out, a lot of the criticism of it was pretty uniform. People were saying the same things about it. And in my experience, it was not only what was in the mainstream media, you know, in the reviews online and on the press, but it was also friends of mine. People who had seen it before I did and were giving me word-of-mouth reviews were all saying pretty much the same thing. They said that the visuals were really impressive and that the plot was just a complete rip-off of, and here it depends a little bit. Some people said it was a complete rip-off of Dances with Wolves. Some people said it was a complete rip-off of Ferngully. Some stuff I saw online, some reviewers says it was a complete ripoff of those old Jimmy Stewart movies. And I don't know exactly what movies they're referring to. I've not seen those movies. I mean, I've seen Jimmy Stewart movies, but I've not seen these particular Jimmy Stewart movies. Apparently there was one or maybe more than one Jimmy Stewart movies in which he had a kind of a plot similar to Dances with Wolves back in the 1950s. I don't know. But anyways, those were the two things that everyone was saying. That it was rehashing plots that had been already done in previous movies and that the visuals were really impressive. So, I guess let's start with the visuals. The visuals were very impressive. I think particularly the landscapes were very impressive. You know, when you saw the whole world of this planet, and it was all CGI, and you know there were these floating mountains and floating mountains and spectacular waterfalls, glowing plants, vibrant green jungles. And it all looked beautiful, and it looked, you know, it looked exotic and alien, but at the same time realistic. It didn't look like it was done on computers. It looked like these were real plants. And I remember, even though people had been telling me this beforehand, you know, that the visuals were really impressive, still being quite blown away in the theaters. Since then, when I've rewatched this movie on TV, and I've seen it on TV a couple times since I initially saw it in the theaters, I've not had that same sense. And I don't know, maybe if it's because it was, you know, it's on the small screen, or maybe because as the years go by, we get less impressed by CGI. You know, what was groundbreaking in 2009 seems commonplace very quickly. Or I don't know, maybe it's just me. Or maybe it's just because I've already seen it. You know, maybe even now in 2020, if I was seeing it for the first time on TV, I would be impressed by it. But as it happens, when I see it on TV nowadays, you know, it's not bad, but I'm not blown away by it anymore. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think. When you see this movie on TV, are you as impressed by the visuals as you were when you first saw it in 2009? The other thing, of course, when this movie was out in theaters in 2009, it was in 3D. And it had the unfortunate effect of causing a 3D boom, which meant for years afterwards, there was a whole bunch of movies that didn't need to be in 3D, or in some cases, I think were even converted into 3D post-production. That were just there to catch in on this 3D boom or as an excuse to charge higher ticket prices. And that got annoying fast. But Avatar itself, as a movie, I thought the 3D in Avatar was justified and it enhanced the viewing experience. And again, maybe this is another reason why it doesn't seem to pop so much to me when it's on TV as it did when it was first in the theaters. I had read some reviews that said that the battle sequence in this movie was like the greatest battle scenes ever filmed, or the greatest action scenes ever on the screen. And that got me really hyped up for this movie, and I was mildly disappointed. I mean, the battle scenes were all right, but I think that was definitely overhyped to say they were the greatest battle scenes ever. They were all right, but I don't think there were anything that was really above and beyond any other big budget Hollywood special effects movie. Okay. So, on to the second point, the plot. So, as a number of people have already pointed out, this is pretty much the same plot as either Dances with Wolves or Fern Gully. Dances with Wolves and Fern Gully essentially having the same plot, I guess. Where, somebody from the colonizing side goes over and gets acquainted with the natives, and then ends up becoming the savior of the natives. Well, I mean, you've seen Dances with Wolves or Fern Gully. And yeah, that was exactly the same plot here. Now, on one sense, it's a little bit silly to complain about this, because recycling plots is what Hollywood does, right? So you don't want to say, oh, it was terrible, it was a big budget Hollywood movie, and they just recycled the plot from another big budget Hollywood movie. I mean, it's no use getting shocked about that, right? That's what Hollywood does all the time. And yet, it does seem a little bit different in this case, because this isn't a generic action flick. This is a preachy movie. And movies with a message, or movies that want to get a little bit preachy, I suppose we have more of a limited tolerance for the plot just getting recycled. Or at the very least, we tend to notice it a little bit more. Now, Dances with Wolves was, I'm sure, an oversimplification of history, but it was at least grounded in real historical people and a real historical conflict, the Sioux Indians. Which, at least for me, when I was seeing it, and I was quite young when I saw it, I was about 12 when it was in theaters, it allowed me to get very emotionally invested in it. Like, oh, this is terrible, I can't believe my ancestors did this, what a huge historical injustice, because you feel the tragedy of something that was real and something that really happened in history. And that gives the movie a lot more emotional weight, and at least for me, it increased the amount to which I was willing to get emotionally involved in the movie. Even though I know it was an oversimplification of history. However, when you transport that into the realm of science fiction, I mean, science fiction is wonderful. Science fiction can do a whole lot of allegories and can make you think about stuff, but it doesn't have the same emotional punch. So when I was watching the climactic scene of this movie, in which like the spirit tree was being destroyed, and it was supposed to be something that was supposed to make you feel real emotional, and you could see how sad all the blue people are, I was holding myself back from getting emotionally invested in it, because I was thinking, there's a lot of terrible stuff that's happening out there in the real world. I don't have the energy to feel sad about the blue people and their tree. Like, this isn't real. This is a completely made-up world. So I don't know. That was just me. I don't know. I mean, what was your experience? Did you feel as emotionally invested in this? I mean, admittedly, some of that was my conscious brain telling myself, no, you're not going to get teary-eyed about this. This is a silly science fiction movie. There was some level in which my conscious mind was telling myself, not to get emotionally invested. Whereas if it had been like a movie about South Africa apartheid, or if it had been a movie about the Sioux Indians, or a movie about a real historical injustice, then I feel more licensed to get emotional about it. But yeah, I do think that's a weakness from transporting this same story into fantasy or science fiction, is it just doesn't have the real punch as it does when it's grounded in a real historical context. And I mean, really, why not put this in a real historical context? I mean, if this is a story James Cameron wants to tell, Dances with Wolves has already been done, but do something about the Belgians in the Congo, or you do something about the British in India, or there's plenty other historical contexts where you can put a very similar story to this, and it would have more emotional weight, in my opinion, because it had that feeling of something with a real historical legacy. Which brings us to the next point, maybe, is that this felt like a real oversimplification of how colonialism really works. And in my case, I watched this movie at the same time I was reading a book called Three Rivers on the Nile, which I've just recently reviewed on this channel as well. But that was a book about how the British government got involved in Egypt and the Sudan. And it's quite a complicated story once you get into it. And it involves liberal politicians like Gladstone, people who did not want the British having direct rule in these colonies, kind of getting sucked into assuming direct rule because of a series of events that was destabilizing the region. And it just made me think about how complicated a lot of these imperialistic ventures are. There's another way to look at it. There's a famous conversation, or famous debate between William F. Buckley and Noam Chomsky that takes place in 1969. You can look this up on YouTube. Just search for Noam Chomsky, William F. Buckley. And they're talking about the Vietnam War. And Buckley says, well, this can't possibly be imperialism because we want to help the Vietnamese. And Chomsky said, no, if you look at history, the imperialist powers never say, we are complete monsters and we are just going in because we want to exploit your resources. They always have some sort of moral justification that they use as a cover to get involved. Now, Chomsky does admit that there are exceptions, like the Belgians in the Congo, where there wasn't even the veneer of an excuse, humanitarian excuse to get involved. But aside from some of those rare exceptions, there's always a reason, a humanitarian reason. Like we're trying to impose order, we're trying to liberate the country, we're trying to spread democracy. In the old days, it was quite often used under the guise of religion. We're bringing Christianity, we're bringing civilization. So, in the movie Avatar, of course, it's very black and white. There are the colonialists, the imperialists. They want to go in there and grab the resources from the native peoples, and they're not even trying to hide what they're doing. And that is usually not the way history works. So it's a criticism you can make of this movie. Now, there was another criticism of this movie which came from the right, saying that James Cameron was being unpatriotic by even making a movie that would suggest that imperialism and colonialism was wrong. No, I think that's just ridiculous. But I do think that it might be worth, if you're going to make that movie, try to get into the complexities of it. And try and look at a lot of the real world situations in which one power ends up colonizing the others. I mean, there's tons of different scenarios you can do. You can have them the invading power goes in for humanitarian reasons, like when the British got involved in the Sudan to try and stop the slave trade. But of course, once they were in there, then they helped themselves to the resources as well. But the excuse was going in for humanitarian reasons. Or you can initially go in for humanitarian reasons, but then also because you've got there's a bit of racism going on there, then this is slippery slope, and pretty soon you end up killing the people you came in to help. Like the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, or Haditha in Iraq. Or you could claim that the area represented a security threat, and so you've got to go in there and stabilize it because it's a security threat to you, which would be like Cromwell going into Ireland, or the US going into Afghanistan. Or you could get involved in one side in a civil war, like the British in Afghanistan back in the 19th century. Or the US in Vietnam, or the Russians in Afghanistan, or Caesar getting involved in Gaul. Or you could establish a puppet government, and then you're going in there to support ostensibly the puppet government, like, Japan did in Manchuria, or the Russians again in Afghanistan. Or instead of going in and conquering the land, you could just bribe the local elites to give you whatever you want, like the Shell Oil Company in Nigeria. Or if the government refuses to cooperate, then you could install a military dictatorship by aiding a military coup, like the US did to Chile in 1971, or Guatemala in 1954, or the British did to Iran in 1953. I mean, you get the point. Very seldom is it where a country says, we're the bad guys, we're just going to go in and take your resources from you. There's always some sort of an excuse. Another criticism that I heard of this movie, and this is somebody on Twitter, they said, watched Princess Mononoke for the upteenth time, and I realized it's precisely the movie Avatar could have been with writing or characterization. And yeah, that's true. Princess Mononoke, I'm not going to get into a full review of that here because that's a whole separate movie that deserves to be reviewed in a separate video. But if you haven't seen it, by all means go out and see it. But if you haven't seen it, here's the short version. Princess Mononoke is about the humans encroaching on the forest and taking away the resources. But none of the humans doing that are bad people. The leader is portrayed as a woman who is just trying to help her people lead a better life. And these humans who are taking the resources from the forest are outcasts of society who have nowhere else to turn to. So they go under this leadership of this woman, Lady Boshi, who's trying to provide for them and give them a better life. And in the process of doing that, it means taking away resources from the forest. It's a brilliant movie that goes out of its way to say there are no clear good guys and no clear bad guys in this. Which isn't to say that sometimes there aren't clear bad guys. I mean, in the history of imperialism, there are clear bad guys, but it is worth sometimes exploring the complexities of it and the different motivations. So yeah. Oh, sorry. One more thought, I guess. Having said all that, I'm going to maybe argue both sides of this and say that there are levels to this. So, there's level 1, level 2, level 3, and maybe level 1 is just an acknowledgement that imperialism is bad. So to bring it back to Dances with Wolves, I mean, Dances with Wolves was a movie which did not try to portray the motives of the U.S. cavalry as complex. The white cowboys moving in there, they were just portrayed as savages or barbarians or bad guys, really. But that movie, when I saw it when I was 12, had an impact on me. And I think it had an impact of people in my generation. You know, when you're first learning about what happened to the Native Americans when you're in grade 2, you don't need to learn about all the complexities of it. You just need to learn that a huge injustice was done to the native peoples of America. And that's level 1. And then once you've got that, then maybe it's time to go on to level 2 and talk about the complexities of it. So I saw Dances with Wolves when I was 12. I was in my early 30s by the time I saw Avatar. So if Avatar, you know, by the time I saw this, I was ready for a more level 2 type movie. And I was disappointed that Avatar was still hitting at level 1. But that's just me because I was in my 30s when I saw this. There are people who were 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 when this movie came out. And maybe for those people, it was useful to have a level 1 type movie. Just saying, you know, this is bad when you go into somebody else's land and establish control and take their resources. So I don't know. Maybe this movie did have more of a useful message for the younger viewers who saw it. I don't know. I'll just leave it there.